sessions. I hope you guys are all doing well and staying safe and healthy and happy. If you are new here, my name is Karen and I love sharing my love or my joy of crochet and anything that's crafty in the crochet arena. And in today's tutorial, what we're going to be working on is the mesh stitch rectangle granny. Now, for those of you that have been following me for a while, not too long ago, I did a mesh stitch granny square. And you guys really loved that so much that you've been asking me about doing a rectangle. So that is what I'm going to show you how to do today, how to create your rectangle for any size and how to work out the formulation. Now, what I would recommend, I've already done one here, because I know I'm going to get people asking me questions about how to do a granny rectangle for certain dimensions. What I recommend is this. Start off with the smallest size possible. So in this case, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit more in the tutorial, but what you want to do is create your first round of the granny rectangle. And so that would mean chaining 6 to begin with. And this is going to give you the smallest rectangle shape or the smallest rectangle size. Otherwise, anything smaller than this is going to be a square. And once you've done the first round, you want to measure the width, right? And you don't want to measure necessarily the length, you want to measure the width. And the reason is that for every additional round you are going to complete, that is going to tell you how much your project is going to increase by on each side. So again, I'm going to go over this a little bit more once we start the tutorial, and I'll show you how to create your rectangle. So that is really important because then you can gauge, you can kind of figure out how many chains you're going to need to create, whatever dimension that you like. So in this one, this is the smallest rectangle possible, meaning this is the smallest initial rectangular shape. So it's done in this dark yarn. So I am going to do it in a lighter color for the tutorial. And I'm going to make this particular tutorial slightly longer so you can really see the true rectangular shape coming to life. So this one is just a much more rectangular shape because it is a smaller version. And so let's just get started, and I'm going to tell you all the materials you're going to need, and I'll show you exactly how to create your own mesh stitch granny rectangle. Okay, so for this project, I am just using some yarn that I had lying around here, and this is by Loops and Threads, Snuggly Wuggly. And in case you're curious, the color I am using is called Cool Baby. So there you go. It's actually a lightweight number 3 yarn. And for this project, I'm going to be using a 5mm hook, which is also known as an H or a size 8. And as always, make sure you have a pair of scissors on hand and possibly a yarn needle to sew in any ends you may have for whatever particular project you might be working on for this motif. So we want to begin by placing a slip knot onto our hook. And in order to create the mesh motif, we want to start off by creating the length for our rectangle, which is what I call the spine of your work. So if I bring this one back here, just like a granny square, we create the center and then we work our way out and we go in rounds. So because it's a rectangle, I call the initial chain the spine that runs along the rectangle. So that one I did the smallest size. So for this one, I'm going to make it a little bit longer. And you're going to do this in multiples of 3. So for the smallest rectangle size with a little bit more of a subtle look, I chained 6. So what I'm going to do for this tutorial is I'm going to chain 12. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. So 12 gives me 4 sets of 3. Remember, multiples of 3. So right now, the initial length is 12 chains long. And again, when you use your desired chain, you want to measure that. And then that measurement, that length, will always increase by the width of the first round we're going to create. And I'll explain that a little bit more in a moment. Okay. Once you have your length, so I have 12 chains, you're going to actually chain an additional 4. So we have 1, 2, 3, and 4. This additional chain 4 is going to count as a double crochet and a chain 1. Next, what you're going to do is you're going to go into the 5th chain from your hook. So never count the loop on your hook. So you've just created 4 chains, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then into the 5th one, we're going to place a double crochet. And so what we're creating here, which I'm going to show you in a second, is actually a V-stitch. So hopefully you can see that. Okay, so this is going to be our short side of the rectangle. So I'm just going to grab a piece of paper here. Okay, so we are beginning with our chain. So just going to zoom in here. We're beginning with our initial chain. Okay, and so the first thing we've created is a V-stitch. So that's going to be our short side. We're then going to create a corner, create our long side, create another corner, and then we're going to do another V-stitch there. And so that's going to give us our short side. Then we create another corner, the long side, and then we create another corner. These corners are not very defined here, but essentially that's what's happening, okay? So that's what I meant when I said, you know, you have your length. Once you create your first round, you're going to take the measurement across the way. And every round after the first round, your width will always increase by this measurement, as well as your length, as long as, of course, your gauge is consistent. So this will be a good little guide to help you figure out how many chains you would need to create a longer project. So that's kind of why crocheting up a swatch is pretty important. I know a lot of people don't like doing swatches. This one's pretty quick to do, but once you have that main measurement, then you'll be able to figure out your length and width for larger projects. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. So back to our first round. Okay, so we've created our short side. So now we need to create our first corner, which is going to be a chain 2. So 1 and 2. If you're a super tight crocheter, I would recommend chaining 3. And now into the very next chain, what we're going to do is we're going to place a double crochet. So we're going to place a double crochet. Then you're going to chain 1 and place another double crochet right back into that stitch. And there is your corner. So you might be thinking, those look like all V-stitches. That is correct. Because the V-stitch is a lacy stitch and we're working around corners here, that is what I'm going to use to create your initial lacy effect. Okay? So moving on, we're now going to skip the next 2 stitches, 1 and 2, and into the third one, we're going to place another V-stitch. So you'll insert your hook and double crochet. Then we're going to chain 1, and back into that same stitch, you're going to place another double crochet stitch. Just like that. So now you can see that corner is really coming to life there. Okay, and then you're going to do that again. You're going to skip the next 2 stitches, 1 and 2, and into the third one, you're going to place another V-stitch. So this is giving us the chance to really create some nice space. You have a double crochet, chain 1, and double crochet. So you can see it's nice and lacy like that. Then we do that one more time, 1, 2, and into the third stitch, you're going to place that V-stitch. So normally when we would work a shell motif, we would work 3 double crochets into one stitch. So essentially it's the same principle because we're working 3 stitches, a double crochet, chain 1, double crochet. The difference with the V-stitch is it just gives it a little bit more of a lacy effect. Okay, now we've got 1 stitch left and we need to create our corner. So we're going to chain 1, 2, or you might chain 3. And now into our last stitch, we are going to place a V-stitch again. So into that last chain, we double crochet, chain 1, and double crochet. Okay, so now you can see that it's coming around the bend there. And you can experiment with this. If you find chain 2 for you just doesn't give you enough bend, then definitely use a chain 3 in your corner, okay? So now we're gonna move along to the bottom side of our rectangle. Okay, so now we're gonna create our next corner by chaining 2. And now we're gonna work along the bottom side of our spine, I call it. Now it's a little easier because we're basically gonna insert our V-stitches into the bottoms of the previous V-stitches created. So now we've come around the corner here, and what we're going to do is right into that first stitch there, we're going to place our next V-stitch. So that is a double crochet, chain 1, and double crochet. Okay, so now you can see our full short side has been created. Isn't that neat? It's very lacy. Okay, and now I'm just going to continue on finding the next V-stitch. That's the bottom there. And I'm just going to insert my next V-stitch into that. Chain 1 and double crochet. And I'm going to repeat that until I get to my very last one here. Okay, so I've just finished that last V-stitch. And so this one belongs to the short side. Now all I have to do is create a corner. So I'm going to chain 2, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to find that third chain from the bottom of that very first V-stitch I did, 1, 2, and 3, and I'm going to slip stitch to join. And now round 1, I was going to say row, round 1 of our mesh rectangle is complete. So it's very lacy in nature. And so this is the time, like I said before, where you want to take your width measurement. And this is most important because it doesn't matter how long you make it. The width here is really how much your length as well as your width will always increase with each round, because essentially it's the measurement of the height of your stitches. And because we have 2 sides here, your width will always increase by that same amount, and so will your length. So I'm just going to take a little measuring tape here. Whoops, actually I'm just going to use a ruler. So my width, I can see, is just about, just about 1.25 inches. So I know that for every round I complete, my width will increase by 1.25 inches with every round, okay? And if you wanted to divide that in half, that's approximately 3/4 inch per side. So that means this would be 3/4 inch, this would be 3/4 inch, and this side would be 3/4 inch, because remember, we're increasing by the height of our stitch. And so if you start off and you want to make a blanket, let's say, I know that I've got 1.25 inches, or sorry, if you're dealing in metric, let me just take a measurement there. So that is just under 3 centimeters, okay? Then what you're going to do, so I know I have 3 centimeters in length. Then I'm going to take my width, and I can see that I've got about 9 centimeters in width, in length. So that would be my center of my project. And then so you would just calculate that there. So we've got here So that's my initial little rectangle. And so if I've got 9 centimeters here, and I've got I'm dealing in centimeters, 3 centimeters there, then I know the next round, for example, my length, this would be round 2, would be 12 centimeters, because I know that every round is going to be 3 centimeters. That's why I said this one is the most important one. So it started off with 9 and I add 3 for the length. Okay. And then the width would then be 6 centimeters. Okay. And of course, if you're doing that in inches, we started off with 1.25 inches. And let me just take my length here. And that's about 3.5 inches there. So, sorry, that should be here, 3.5 inches. So in the next round, I would be increasing my length by 1.25. So that would end up being 4.75 inches in length. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. So I'm just going to do one more. So if I did round number 3, okay, this is a very crude drawing. Sorry, guys. And so I'm going to stick with centimeters for a moment. So I know that in round 2 I had 12, so I've always increased by 3. So I know in round 3 I'm going to have, oh my goodness, I know I'm going to have 15 centimeters in length, and then I'm going to have 9 centimeters in width. So that way you can gauge like how much of a ratio you want your short side to your long side to have, okay? And hopefully that'll help you determine what your initial chain is. Like if you want your length to increase, I guess we'll say quicker right off the top, then you are going to do a longer chain. So you know that, so for me, I know that 12 chains gives me 9 centimeters. Then I can gauge how long I want my project to be. And I know that with every round, it's going to increase by 3 centimeters, right? And so in this case, that's why doing one with the shortest rectangle swatch first is important. So this one was done with 6 stitches. And yeah, I'll just stick to inches here for a second. And so 6 stitches gives me, oops. So my base rectangle there was 6 stitches, and that gave me 2 inches. Okay, that's for my long side. So now for my short side, which is the width, I have about 1 inch. So it's basically, the ratio is 1 to 2. Okay, so I know that as I increase, the length of this one is always going to increase by 1. So remember, the increase is always by the short side. So in the second round, I would then have 3 inches, and here I'd have 2 inches. Okay, and so this way I would know if I'm making my rectangle to be a little bit more subtle, then you can just, like if you're doing a lacy, like baby blanket, I would say, then you can kind of gauge it a little bit more. It's a little easier to kind of figure out where you're going. It's almost square-like, but not quite. And this way, you know, based on, you know, if you're a tight crochet or loose crocheter, you'll know if you are happy with just starting with the 6, which is the smallest rectangle you could do, the 6 chains, or if you want to experiment and start doing a longer spine and really accentuate that rectangular shape. I hope I'm making sense to you guys, because I know in my brain it makes sense, but hopefully that helps you out a lot as well. So as I showed you how to create the mesh stitch rectangle, I also wanted to tackle the question of like, how many chains do I do for X length? So hopefully that makes sense. And what I might do is I may even do a follow-up crochet quick chat specifically about calculations as well. Okay. All right. In the meantime, let's go on to round number 2. Okay, so we're going on to round number 2. Round number 1, we understand how to create. This establishes our shape. And now round number 2 is how we're going to continuously build up our rectangle. Now I like to always create my motifs beginning in the corners, okay? Now some people might just go backwards into that corner. I'm just not a fan of doing that. So what I'm going to do for round 2 is I'm just going to slip stitch my way over to that corner. So I'm just going to slip stitch into the space here, and because it's a lacy project, it's a-okay to do that. Then I'm going to go into the stitch, slip stitch, and then slip stitch over into my corner here. Great. Okay, so into the corner, what I'm going to do is I am going to chain up 5. So I have 1, 2, 3. That's going to represent a double crochet, and then 4 and 5 is going to represent the chain 2 to create the corner. Okay, and it'll all make sense in a moment. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into this corner space and I'm going to place a V-stitch. So I'm going to place a double crochet, chain 1, and double crochet back into that corner space. Okay. And so what I've done there is this chain 3 is going to be part of the other V-stitch. So we're only creating part of the V-stitch. Chain 2 is the corner, and then we have a full V-stitch there. And it'll make a lot more sense, like I said, when we come back around. Now we're going to work a proper mesh stitch. Okay, so we're going to chain 1. We're going to skip the next stitch, and into the chain 1 space, we're going to place a double crochet. Just like that. Then you're going to chain 1. And what we're going to do is we're going to go into this space here and place a double crochet. Chain 1. We're going to skip this stitch, and into the space there, we're going to place a double crochet. Now, some of you, when you work on granny motifs, a lot of times between your shell motifs, you would chain 1. But you don't have to. A lot of times we chain 1 to create a nice little kind of even spacing there. So normally, so for example, in between the V stitches, we would chain 1 just to create a little bit of a nice kind of opportunity for it to sit flat. I don't tend to chain 1 in between my motifs because I'm not a super tight crocheter. If you are, I definitely recommend you chaining 1. So those of you that are concerned, well, we're kind of adding an extra stitch, it's going to be okay because again, this is the establishing round. And so you're going to see that your work is still going to sit nice and flat. So we're going to continue doing this all the way to the next corner. So chain 1. And into that space, we double crochet. So essentially what's happening is we chain 1 and double crochet into the next space. So then double crochet there. See? So you can see the lacy effect. So that is how we generally do the mesh stitch. Double crochet, chain 1, skip a stitch, double crochet, chain 1, skip a stitch, etc. So I'm going to chain 1 again. I'm almost at my next corner. I'm going to go into the space here. Chain 1, I have another space here, double crochet, chain 1, and now I'm in my corner. Remember, that's my short side there. So into my corner, I'm going to place a full V-stitch. So that means double crochet, chain 1, double crochet back into that space. And now I need to create my corner, which is chain 2, or I need to create the bend of my corner, and I'm going to go back into that same space and place a double crochet, chain 1, and double crochet. So like if you're creating a regular granny motif, you would do shell stitch, chain 2, shell stitch. So here we're doing V-stitch, chain 2, V-stitch. Okay, so I'm going to take this out here so you can see a little bit more clearly. So we've worked part of a corner here. We've done a mesh stitch all the way across to our next corner. So you can see it's really, the corner is now really starting to take shape. So let's continue around. So now we're going around our short side, which is growing. Okay, so we're going to chain 1 into the space. You'll place a double crochet and chain 1. See? So now we're going across there, and immediately we found our next corner. So we do the same thing. V-stitch, chain 1, double crochet, then chain 2, and place a V-stitch back into that same space. There we go. Now you can really see the corners becoming much more prominent, okay? And so now what you're gonna do is you're gonna repeat what you did on this side, chain 1, double crochet into the space, chain 1, double crochet into all of your spaces. So chain 1 space, and when you get to this corner here, you know what to do. V-stitch, chain 2, V-stitch, chain 1 and double crochet into this space, and then I'm going to meet up with you here to talk about joining up round number 2, and then we'll be ready to go on to round number 3. Okay, so I just finished that third corner, and now I've come across the way, so I'm doing a chain 1, and now I need to finish that very first corner we started. So we have the V-stitch here. This is the chain 2 space, and 3 of these chains counts as a double crochet. So I'm going to go back into the same stitch and place the last double crochet there that's going to form that V-stitch. And then I'm going to chain 1, and I'm going to find the top of that third chain, and I'm going to slip stitch to join. And I always like starting and ending this way because it kind of hides any seams. They kind of get lost in the corners there. So this is round 2 complete. So you can really see that our rectangle is really taking shape there. So again, this one has a much longer spine, so you can really see how the shape is coming out. So now, going on to subsequent rounds, it's pretty much going to be a repeat of round 2. But I'll say this, which is what I also said about the mesh stitch granny square. You may just have to observe your corners and alternate between doing a full V-stitch, chain 2 V-stitch, and in some rounds you may only do a double crochet, chain 2 double crochet, which in fact is what I'm going to do for round 3. And the reason why you might want to do that is because of the mesh stitch and the way it sits. Sometimes when you place the V-stitch, chain 2 V-stitch several rounds in a row, you might notice that there's going to be a bunching situation here. So we're going to go on to round number 3, and I'm going to show you what I'm going to do in round number 3. And so I've slip stitched to join, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to slip stitch into that space, because like I said, I always like to work out of that corner space. Okay, so I'm going to chain 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, just like I did before. And now I'm just going to place 1 double crochet into that space. So for round 3, this is what's going to create my corner. Okay, so I'm putting less stitches in the corner for this round. So then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to continue on and chain 1. And now I'm going to work my mesh stitch across the way. So you can see I have a V-stitch here, but I'm going to just work into the space. And then chain 1, work into the next space. So now it's easy because you have spaces to work into, and the chain 1, you're basically skipping over the stitch and always working into the space. So chain 1 again, work into the space. And so that's how we're working our mesh stitch. So you can just gauge here. If you see that it starts pulling over too much, then you can go back and do your traditional V-stitch, chain 2 V-stitch. But I'm going to continue on with round 3, just keeping these corners very, very simple and with less stitches, and then I'll assess the situation at the end of round 3. So for now, I'm just going to continue on until I get to that first full corner, and I'll meet you here in a moment to show you how I'm going to do that corner there. Okay, so I've got that first V-stitch in the corner of the previous round, so I'm just going to work 1 double crochet. I'm going to chain 1, and now into the corner space, I'm just going to place a double crochet, chain 2, and double crochet back into that corner. And then I'm just going to continue working along my short side, chain 1 into the very next space, which is the V-stitch from the corner of the previous round, chain 1, etc., etc. So I just want to kind of work around that full corner. So now I'm going to assess the situation here, and I can see that it's sitting pretty nicely. It's not bunching. So that is what I'm going to continue to do for the rest of round 3. So you can really see it's taking shape. So go ahead and do that. You're just going to do your mesh stitch, and in the corners now, you're only going to do 1 double crochet, chain 2, 1 double crochet, mesh stitch across, do the same thing, and I'll meet you at the end of round number 3. Okay, and now at the end of round number 3, I've just done my chain 1, and because I've actually already done the full V-stitch here, or the corner space V-stitch, all I'm going to do is I'm going to find the 3rd chain, and I'm going to slip stitch to join that round, just like that. Okay, and now I'm going to put my work down. I'm going to assess the situation, and that was the right call. So that's sitting nicely there, and that is basically it. That's the mesh stitch rectangle. And so in round number 2, my corners were V-stitch, chain 2, V-stitch. In round number 3, the corners were just made of a double crochet, chain 2, double crochet. Again, if you're a tight crocheter, chain 3. And for me, that is generally how I continue building my mesh stitch rectangle, is I would keep alternating how I create my corners. And then the sky is the limit. You can keep doing as many rounds as you like. Like I said, it might make for a nice breezy baby blanket for summertime. A nice lacy scarf would be nice as well. You could do an Afghan. You could do all kinds of things. So I hope you found that pretty straightforward. I'm just going to bring back my other rectangle here. This one I used some scrap yarn I had left over. So again, just to kind of show you the difference here. So this one had a longer spine to begin with, so it's almost at the length, but see how it's got a shorter width, and it's because, again, we had a longer spine. So the shorter you make your spine, the more subtle your rectangle shape is going to be. Very, very subtle. And the longer you make your spine, the more defined that rectangular shape will be. So again, I hope at the beginning, the way I explained how to size your project, that helped. Because I know there's many of you, you're so creative, you want to get started right away on creating things with these motifs. So if you have any more detailed questions, please do feel free to drop me a question down in the comment box down below, or you can always reach me directly. As you know, you can email me at info@crochetcrafty.com, and make sure to visit me on the website and sign up for my monthly newsletter. I give away a free written pattern every month. And for some of the other patterns you may want to check out, please check out my Etsy shop at Crochet Crafty Canada, and I'm still feverishly working away on expanding and continuing to stock up on the catalog of patterns I have there. So if you have enjoyed this tutorial, please make sure to give me a thumbs up, and then I'll know to continue making more tutorials like these. And if you're new here and had a good time hanging out with us today, please consider pressing that subscribe button and hanging out with me every week. I upload a brand new tutorial every Wednesday, and I think you'll enjoy coming and checking out some of the projects we have. We've got some stitch tutorials, we've got some crochet quick chats, all kinds of crochet fun awaiting for you. So in the meantime, I hope you all have a wonderful day. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay happy, take care of each other and yourselves. And I so look forward to seeing you guys again next week for our next session. See you then.